My brother, Marcus, decided to throw a party the night before my wedding, seemingly out of spite. It was a birthday celebration for him, and my parents chose to attend his event over my wedding. In response to this, I felt compelled to file for a restraining order against him. Just a few days ago, I tied the knot, but my family was notably absent. Marcus wasn't even invited to my wedding because we have a long-standing feud, which wasn't surprising. However, I was taken aback that my parents also chose not to attend. Marcus made a last-minute decision to host a lavish 28th birthday party the night before my wedding. He sent out invitations to our family about a week prior, clearly intending to be petty since he hadn't received an invite to my wedding. The party was quite extravagant. He had booked a large venue and arranged for entertainment, including a live band and a stand-up comedian. While the performers might not have been nationally recognized, they were well known locally, and I could only imagine that the catering and drinks were equally impressive. My cousin showed me the invitation, and for a moment, I worried that some family members might choose to attend his celebration instead of our wedding. Ultimately, there was little we could do about it. My wife and I understood that people would have to make a choice. They couldn't attend a party in the city the night before and then make it to our wedding, which was about 8 hours away. We didn't want to pressure our guests, so we decided to let them make their own decisions. Thankfully, everyone chose to attend our wedding, which, in hindsight, made our initial concerns seem trivial. After all, a wedding is a far more significant event than a birthday celebration. The only ones who didn't show up were my parents, which was surprising. Even though we had a disagreement just days before the wedding, I didn't expect them to attend Marcus's party and skip my ceremony. The argument had taken place during a phone call 4 days prior, and after that, I became preoccupied with last-minute preparations, leaving little time to reach out to them. They didn't make an effort to contact me either, but I never imagined they would miss my wedding, especially since it's such a monumental occasion in a person's life, particularly for their own child. The argument had revolved around the wedding and the birthday party. After my cousin showed me the invitation, I called my parents to explain the situation, thinking they would support me and talk to Marcus about backing down. Instead, they insisted that it was my fault for not inviting him and that we should put our past disagreements aside. They claimed he had every right to be petty and that they wouldn't intervene because we were adults now. I was frustrated with my parents for trying to justify Marcus's cruel behavior, so I confronted them, and we ended up in a brief argument. I hung up, telling them that if they truly believed Marcus was in the right for causing trouble, they could go to his party and skip my wedding. I didn't speak to them again until the morning of the wedding. As we drove to the hotel, I kept trying to call them since they were supposed to join us, but the car we had sent for them returned empty. The driver informed us that he had rung the doorbell and called multiple times, but no one answered. I tried reaching out to them throughout the day, but there was no response. By the evening, I had to accept that they might not show up the next day. Even on the morning of the ceremony, I held out hope and attempted to call them again, but still, no answer. I ended up getting married without them. While I would have been upset under different circumstances, I was about to marry the love of my life, so their absence didn't weigh heavily on me at that moment. After the wedding, I decided not to reach out to them again since they had already missed such a significant milestone in my life. Later that evening, during the reception, they finally called me back. I answered out of curiosity, eager to hear what they had to say. They informed me that because I had told them not to come to the wedding, they had chosen to stay away. However, they still wanted to congratulate me. At first, I thought they were referring to the wedding, but they clarified that they were congratulating me for getting my way. It became clear that no one in the family had bothered to attend my celebration. My parents expressed their disappointment in me, suggesting that I had somehow turned the rest of the family against Marcus. They mentioned that they had chastised him for his actions, even though his friends and co-workers had shown up to the party. It turned out to be a significant waste for him, as he had expected a large turnout but only a few people came. Now, Marcus was not only upset with the family but also felt he had wasted a considerable amount of money. My parents' decision to skip my wedding in favor of Marcus's birthday celebration left me bewildered. I couldn't comprehend how they could prioritize his party over such a significant moment in my life. In response, I decided to send an email to all the guests, detailing the entire situation, including the party my brother hosted, the disagreement I had with my parents, and the conversation we had about their absence from the wedding. I laid everything out plainly, not holding back any details. As a result, many family members began distancing themselves from my parents, who were once again placing the blame on me. They claimed I was intentionally stirring up drama and being spiteful toward the family. While that might be true to some extent, I felt it was necessary to explain why my parents chose not to attend my wedding, effectively turning the rest of the family against them. For those who have asked why Marcus and I have such a strained relationship, there isn't a single reason. Even as children, we weren't particularly close. As we grew older, we drifted further apart. He always seemed a bit envious of me, often mimicking my actions, which irritated me. This led to frequent arguments, and by the time we reached high school, we genuinely disliked each other. I left for college and eventually settled into a job, returning home occasionally. However, Marcus remained unpleasant, making snide comments about my appearance, salary, and other personal matters. Eventually, I decided it was best to ignore him, knowing that engaging would only lead to more conflict. Over time, he realized that I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction, and we simply stopped communicating. Even at family gatherings, we would avoid each other. There wasn't a specific incident that caused this rift, it was a culmination of negative experiences over the years. I didn't invite him to my wedding because I didn't feel I had done anything wrong. I doubted he expected an invitation, and if he did, it would have been an unreasonable expectation. My parents were aware of the reasons I had distanced myself from him. They initially tried to mediate, but their efforts failed, and they eventually stopped trying. To my knowledge, they had always attempted to be fair to both of us, so I was shocked by their recent behavior. It felt as though they were unjustly siding with Marcus, which had never happened before. That's just how things stood. In my first update, I expressed my gratitude to everyone who commented, reassuring me that none of this was my fault and that I had nothing to apologize for. I deleted all the emails from my parents that flooded my inbox after I revealed the truth to the family, and I blocked them on all platforms. They could try to create new accounts to reach me, but I wouldn't retract what I had written. I hadn't fabricated anything, I simply shared the truth in my email. I didn't even delve into my personal feelings, I merely stated the facts. People were free to make their own choices, and if others chose to cut my parents off due to their behavior, that was not my concern. On the day of the wedding, my parents had already accused me of trying to turn the family against Marcus, so I felt justified in doing what they claimed I was doing. Why should I be punished for something I hadn't even done? What I did was far less underhanded than their current attempts to manipulate the situation. Some cousins and relatives sent me the email my parents had sent in response to mine, claiming I had always been jealous and insecure about Marcus. They suggested that his last-minute birthday party was a retaliation for my supposed attempts to make him feel bad. They fabricated a story in which I supposedly called Marcus after sending out wedding invitations to mock him for not being invited, claiming I didn't want my in-laws to know he was a lazy freelancer. Of course, I had never done anything of the sort, and anyone who knows me would see through that lie. The rest of the family wouldn't believe their accusations, so I didn't feel the need to clarify anything. I knew they were lying, and it was amusing to see them resort to such tactics to paint me as the villain in order to salvage their own reputations. Their efforts were backfiring, making things worse for them. I couldn't understand why they were so determined to portray me as the bad guy, especially since I hadn't done anything to harm them aside from sending one email. It didn't make sense to me, but it was clear they were desperate in grasping at straws. For me, this marked the end of a chapter, and I intended to focus on my new life as a married man. I knew I could deal with the drama later, this moment was too precious to let it slip away. In my second update, I shared that it had been a week since my last post. Marcus and my parents decided to include me in a conference call. I picked up the phone, feigning ignorance for about 5 minutes, even though I knew they were calling to yell at me. They had to ensure I could hear them, which was amusing to watch as they coordinated their approach. Eventually, they got down to business, informing me that the rest of the family was upset with them. Everyone was angry about their actions and believed my parents and Marcus were being exceedingly petty. They expected me to do something about it, but I had no idea what they had in mind. I asked what they wanted me to do, even though I had no intention of agreeing to anything. I decided to play along for the sake of amusement, and they took my curiosity as sincerity. They told me that a lot had been said among us, and at the end of the day, the only thing hurting us was our family's reputation. I found it interesting that they were framing it this way because, in my opinion, the entire incident hadn't damaged my image at all. People still like me, but I realized they wanted me to believe this was about my reputation so I would be more inclined to comply with their requests. They proposed sending out another email stating that we had decided to work things out and forgive each other because, after all, we were still family. They insisted that the only way to repair our reputation was to avoid becoming the laughingstock of the family due to this incident. Unfortunately for them, I saw right through their facade. I realized they were only pretending to forgive each other because they knew no one believed the lies they had been spreading about me. If they didn't want to be ostracized by the rest of the family, they had to act as if everything was fine between us and that I had forgiven them. But I had had enough of their games, so I politely declined their proposal and made it clear that it was they who wanted to repair their reputation, not me. I had no reason to pretend I had forgiven them. I also took issue with how they framed the situation, stating that we had forgiven each other. I didn't believe they were in a position to forgive me since I hadn't done anything wrong. Sure, I may have said some things in the heat of the moment, but it was ultimately their choice to miss my wedding in favor of Marcus's birthday party. Whatever fallout occurred afterward was a direct result of their actions. After all the lies they had spread about me, I didn't want to appear weak by pretending to forgive them. I made it clear that I did not agree with their proposal. If they wanted to remain angry with me and continue spreading lies in hopes that someone would believe them, they were free to do so. My parents and Marcus were furious. Marcus accused me of being entirely at fault, claiming that if I had just done the decent thing and invited him to such an important family occasion, none of this would have happened. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but then I remembered it was my wedding. I wasn't obligated to invite everyone, especially someone I didn't get along with. I told Marcus this, and we ended up in a heated argument over the phone. He called me selfish, and I pointed out that it was ridiculous for him to expect an invitation, especially since we had barely communicated outside of family gatherings for years. If he wanted me to treat him better, he should have done the same. As far as I could recall, he had never invited me to any of his celebrations, even though they were never as significant as a wedding. Eventually, the conversation became too loud and chaotic. Marcus was shouting, and my parents were rambling about something else, making it impossible to follow the discussion. I decided to hang up and block their burner phone numbers. I wouldn't say I completely regretted the call, I had some fun with them, but it became exhausting. If they tried to contact me again, I doubted I would answer. As enjoyable as it was at first, it had become too much. In my next update, I shared that it had been a few days since my last post. Around 4 a.m., my phone began buzzing with an unknown number. I didn't answer, suspecting it was Marcus or one of my parents calling. It was early, and I had no intention of engaging with them at that hour, especially since I had to work in a few hours. About half an hour later, I started hearing shouting outside our house, accompanied by someone ringing the doorbell incessantly and banging on the door. It was unsettling, and it took my wife and me a moment to realize what was happening. Soon enough, we recognized the voices of my parents and Marcus outside, demanding that we open the door. They insisted they needed to speak with us, claiming that my actions were ruining their lives. They stated that they had been completely cut off from the rest of the family, and it was all my fault. If it had been any other time of day, I might have found what annoyed me the most was that it was 4 a.m., and they were harassing us in such an outrageous manner. They were incredibly loud, and I was sure the neighbors could hear them too. It was embarrassing, and I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. I knew they had startled the neighbors, who were kind enough to pretend nothing had happened afterward. When I heard them outside, I didn't hesitate, I called the police. I had reached my limit. My wife and I stayed in bed, letting them scream until their voices were hoarse while we waited for the cops to arrive. We were both furious about the situation, and we didn't get out of bed until the police showed up. We explained the entire issue to the officers, who then removed my parents and Marcus from our property. By that time, we had lost a lot of sleep and had to miss work that day. It was incredibly frustrating to lose an entire day due to their irrational behavior. I couldn't understand why they were so upset about being cut off from the family, but we had had enough. If this continued, I believed we would need to file for a restraining order. Moving or changing phone numbers is a significant undertaking that can be costly and time-consuming, so it wasn't feasible at the moment. However, it was the least we could do, even if they hadn't explicitly threatened us. I wasn't sure if we had grounds for a restraining order, but we planned to consult a lawyer to see how to proceed. In my next update, I shared that it had been a few days since the incident. The morning after, we spoke with a lawyer. My parents and Marcus had merely been trespassing and causing a disturbance, so they were let off with a warning for disorderly conduct, and no charges were filed. Fortunately, we still had grounds for a restraining order based on their behavior, so we decided to pursue it. We filed the notice, and in a few days, we would go to court to put an end to this madness, which would be a huge relief. I had already spoken to several family members about the situation. I saw no reason to hide their behavior any longer, and it was genuinely shocking that they were acting this way, especially since they had never cared much for the rest of the family. My parents had never been particularly close to the extended family, and Marcus rarely spoke to anyone, so I didn't understand why their being cut off had such a negative impact on them. I suspected this wasn't about the family cutting them off at all, it was more about them trying to create trouble for me. I hoped they were satisfied with the chaos they had caused because they had only made things worse for themselves. Now they had to face the consequences of their actions. It was incredibly unfortunate that so much turmoil could have been avoided if my parents and brother had simply behaved normally. Instead, they went out of their way to embarrass themselves and, by extension, me. It was disheartening that I had to seek a restraining order against my own family, but the circumstances demanded it, and I felt I had no other option. In my fifth update, I shared that it had been 4 weeks since my last post. We had successfully obtained a 2-year restraining order against my family, which was a relief. The rest of the family stood in solidarity with us, as they had from the beginning. They had not only cut my parents and Marcus out of their lives and stopped inviting them to events, but they had also begun to reach out to me more frequently, checking in to see how I was doing. While I felt good most of the time, there were moments when I felt a deep sadness about what had happened to my family. I appreciated that the rest of the family was making up for it. I wouldn't trade this support system for anything in the world. I felt a strong connection to everyone, especially my cousins, who had been at the forefront of everything, assisting me both emotionally and practically, including putting me in touch with an excellent lawyer. I was extremely grateful for everything everyone had done for me, and I felt it was time to start a new chapter. My wife and I were set to leave for our honeymoon in a few days, and I hoped that when we returned, things would have changed. I knew a change of environment was precisely what we needed, and I was looking forward to the next week and a half. I was determined to ignore everything related to my parents and Marcus. I wouldn't let them ruin this for me, just as they had tried to ruin my wedding. I wanted to thank everyone who had stayed updated on my situation and for all the support in the comments. I appreciated it more than I could express. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more shocking real-life stories happening around you.